And the prequel to the Queen's Code, Keys of the Kingdom, I would recommend definitely for your listeners because it distinguishes the things that have men be not ready to be fathers, which is consistent also with not ready to be a boyfriend, not ready to be a husband, not ready to buy a house, not ready to anything. The stages of development have a huge impact. And
all right, guys, today we're talking about how, as women, we may have goals in our lives and we may be driven, whether it's like building our career or like trying to find a man or trying to keep a man or trying to have a baby. All those are goal driven. And what we forget is the backdrop of relationships, and either we're making it or creating it or keeping it, right? And so we are super excited to have Alison Armstrong in the house. And if you will, Dr. Tanya Wild, why don't you introduce her? Because like, for those of you who do not know who she is, because she's like super freaking awesome.
Alison Armstrong is a phenomenal author. She has written 2 key books, Keys to the Kingdom and The Queen's Code. She's an educator, a speaker, and has been studying men since the 90s. And so apparently there's way more to men than we realize. And she has helped thousands of women study themselves, men understand women better and transform themselves and their relationships through her books and courses. And I have been her groupie for several years, learning about myself, learning about my relationships. And now I'm hoping that, this conversation we have with her inspires you to dig deeper into her work and learn from us as we interview her and, hear our faults or as we learn to better ourselves. We are,
because we
are not perfect.
Yeah, we're perfectly imperfect. And then when you're done that, you got to listen to or watch today's episode. So super insightful. And there were surprises for me. I don't know about you that I'm like, oh crap, I forgot about that. And then, but when you're done that, then it's going back to the episode we did about 5 love languages. So take a quiz, learn more so that you can communicate better and just have a better life in general, no matter what you're going through. So just make it a little easier.
The journey. Yeah. Yeah.
We see a lot of women, and not just women, we see a lot of strong, self-sufficient women who feel like they're doing it all. And maybe even the primary breadwinner in relationships and, feeling like they're just doing it all to the point of perhaps overwhelm, right? And no matter what stage of life they're in, whether they're actually trying to conceive or maybe even finding a partner to having a partner and having kids and, just overwhelmed and burnt out. So we want to ask you about what advice you can give to that woman who deeply craves intimacy from her partner. And how would you handle this? To, a single person wanting a partner to propose to them, to just wanting better connection in general, if they're trying to conceive and their sex has been just solely baby focused, right? We would just love your thoughts on all this.
Oh my gosh, you just queued up a lot.
I know.
Where do you want me to start? Which one of all those things?
Maybe tell us what frog farming is. What does that mean?
Okay. And it's a good place to start. I when you're referring to my book before, I assume you're talking about the Queen's Code, which is the one about frog farming. And as you know, Karen, in the Queen's Code, she and her husband are struggling with what's happened to their lives by him finally taking the brakes off of them getting pregnant and her organizing everything around getting pregnant, and their sex life is trashed. And the prequel to the Queen's Code, Keys of the Kingdom, I would recommend definitely for your listeners because it distinguishes the things that have men be not ready to be fathers, which is consistent also with not ready to be a boyfriend, not ready to be a husband, not ready to buy a house, not ready to anything. The stages of development have a huge impact. And one of the things that it isn't articulated in the Queen's Code. It's going to show up in the sequel to the Queen's Code, is what has happened to Karen that, in my experience, interferes with conception. And you had a lot of other questions in here, and I'll be happy to get to them, including as I've counseled women who were single and the clock is ticking on them having a biological child, and they're asking me, what do I do? And so the area that we're talking about is, one way to put it is creation, right? So whether we're wanting to create an amazing relationship, or we're wanting to create a new life, we're wanting to create a career, we're wanting to create fill in the blank. In my experience, one way you could say it is, I think creation requires a unified will. And what I've seen, and with really interesting results, are women who wanted to conceive, or wanted to get a new job, or wanted to be married, and everything they did wasn't working. And so I would ask them, and I would just, because I get this inkling, and I usually would muscle test, right? Like, okay, is this a problem of conflicting will? Oh, yes. Should I say something to them about it? Yes. Will I be glad I did? Yes. I always check those kinds of things. And so I said, okay, I'm going to ask you a question, and please just take what comes up without editing. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, so you've been trying so hard to get pregnant. Yes. Why don't you want to be pregnant? And they'll look on their faces, or they'll say, I want a child. I want a child. Okay. Why don't you want a child? Right? Or I want to get a promotion. And why don't you want that promotion? We were trying so hard to sell our house. And why don't you want to sell your house? And it's fascinating, because there's always something there, and it's big. And what I see is, I call it conflicting wills, because it's happening between just one person, that their desire, their will, their intention, which is incredible in human beings, what we can manifest. And, it's like 4, 4, 4. And then you find out it's equally against. Like one woman who tried so hard to get pregnant, she's like, I'm terrified how it's going to change my life. Okay, right. Let's talk about that. Or you see Karen in the Queen's Code, which a lot of people don't know it's fiction. And it is. And I did all the research for decades to be able to write it. And then when it came to write it, I didn't write it. Let's just be clear about it. I did not write that book. Nobody can write a book in 3 weeks. I typed a movie I was watching. I didn't invent those characters. I didn't invent their stories. I didn't invent the way that the book went. It just, I watched a movie and I typed and typed and typed. So it was a mystical experience, and it makes me laugh and it makes me cry. And I learn something every time I read it, or now I listen to it, right? I'm like my third time of listening to it. But you'll see with Karen that as much as she wants a child, she's terrified of what it'll be like to have one when she's struggling so much with getting her husband Mike's help, right? If she's already overwhelmed with her job as a teacher and taking care of their home and making everything work, and add a child to this, right? Like when she can't even get him to take out the trash, add a child to this. So her will is opposing, as much as she's doing her basal temperature and texting him to come home and inseminate her and all those things that she looks like she's doing 4, 4, 4. in her own being, she's incongruent. And that's the thing that I encourage people to address, to answer the question, right? But what will this do to my life? Well, what will this do to your life? And how are you going to deal with what it does to your life? Whatever it is that we're stuck with, instead of just having the worry, right? Which is, we hallucinate the amygdala, right? Bigger in women and twice as active, the worry center of the brain. Instead of just worrying about it, stop and answer the question. Well, so how will I handle it? Well, what if they say no? What if we don't get this house, or I don't get this promotion, and I counsel women, single women, to do this all the time. Okay, I recommend you make a decision, and it's a hard decision to make. Which matters to you more, having a biological child or having a partner? And this was something we couldn't even ask decades ago, right? I mean, I remember my mother telling me that a single woman with a child would be undesirable to any man. No man would have any interest in a single woman with a child, which is kind of funny because my mom had an older stepbrother, her half brother, because her mother had been divorced with a child when her father met and married her and had 3 more, right? But she still was convinced of this. And it was one of the biggest surprises when I started studying men in 1991 to find out how many men have no aversion to that whatsoever. In fact, some have a preference. Like my husband, Greg, when he found out I had a 1.5-year-old, well, Jeff would have been 3.5 years old at that time. And I made sure he knew immediately, like, I think in my head, if you're going to run now, right? He called after some encouragement to ask me out. And I was like, well, I can only talk for a few minutes because I have to leave to pick up my son.
That's funny.
Right? And I've been that way ever since. I was the same way with my boyfriend, Dan. In the first few minutes I was talking on the phone, I started saying the things that are my absolute deal breakers. And if you're going to run now. And it's one of the most important things to do. And they actually really appreciate it because then they know what they're getting. Right. And they're like, oh, this isn't for me, or I'm not the right person for you, but I know somebody. Right. And if they stick around, they already know. And so I have a student who really wanted to find a partner because she had a clock ticking about having children. And we had the conversation, and her answer was having a child. And so all the split attention that she had and confusion that she had about how to find the right partner became how to find the right sperm donor. And
Yes.
she went ahead and had her eggs harvested and had them fertilized and now she's, oh my gosh, how pregnant is she now? She must be like 7 months pregnant with her son. And she went ahead and did everything she needed to do, all the while still dating and letting every man know, I have these fertilized eggs. I'm going to implant them on this date. If you want to be a dad, if you want to be a father to this child, then we should get to know each other. And now she has a partner who chose that, which really isn't that rare. I found out from Greg that when I told him I had a son, which he practically came through the phone, you have a son? What's his name? How old is he? And found out that made me even more attractive to him than the love at first sight that had already happened. And so many men, I ended up asking them about it. What do you think about being in a relationship with a woman who has a child? And some men are, no, I don't want to do that. And we want to find that out right away, right? And so many men were like, oh, yay, instant family. And then there was even a man who said, it allows us to see what kind of mom you're going to be, to know if we want you to be the mother of our child. And we have more confidence in it. Oh, you're going to be like that? Oh, good, let's do this. Or you're going to be like that? We'll be friends forever, but no, I'm not going to have you be that way with my child. So there are a lot of ways to clear up the conflicting wills, a lot of ways to answer the question that are what you probably heard me say if you watched it, much of what's on YouTube. Honor yourself first, or all is lost. And in this area, especially of creating life, boy, we gotta we gotta clear the way. And one of my favorites was a woman that I asked that question of, and she answered it and cleared the way. And she and her husband left on vacation, and she was only ovulated from one side, one ovary. And on this vacation, they already did the ultrasound, and she was ovulating from the other one with the blocked tube. Oh no, she was ovulating. That's what it was. She had a blocked tube. So she was ovulating from the quote wrong ovary. And so they just went on vacation and they just let it all go. And their son is named after where they went on vacation, because that egg traveled all the way around and went in through the other fallopian tube. Once they just cleared the way of their will.
That's beautiful. And so then how do you speak to couples that are in that place of, gosh, like, I am focused, I am like in that baby making mode. And even though that innate desire of connection and intimacy is there, it gets kind of thrown out of that window. And so how do you bring the women back? Because it's very easy to say, well, just forget about it and go on vacation and enjoy each other, when they've been caught into this technical, project. It becomes a project. So how do you fulfill on that? Mm-hmm.
I think for all of us, our instincts are the biggest barrier to the kinds of relationships we want to have. Partly because men and women tend to have opposing instincts, and what we each do to try to feel safe, which drives us in one way or another almost all the time, it alienates the other. Right. So for most men, being productive, which means being trusted and respected, is what drives them. And for most women, when they're not hunting the deer and worrying about being productive and trusted and respected, they're worried about being connected, feeling connected. And when a man is focused on producing results, we feel disconnected. And so we'll often interrupt what he's focused on to try to get connected to him, and not understand that not only did we just threaten his sense of security by interfering with his ability to produce results, he also experiences being disrespected, that what he was working on wasn't treated as important. And his reaction to her interruption is going to cause a bigger disconnect. And then another thing she doesn't know is how much men experience peace. Men experience peace in being focused on doing one thing at a time and just getting to do it until it's done. And so on top of disrupting productivity and communicating disrespect even when we don't mean it, we're also interfering with their sense of peace. We've just disrupted a peaceful state of mind. It's as if whatever a woman does to be peaceful, right? If she's reading a book or watching her favorite show or talking to her best friend on the phone, or out in nature gardening, whatever she does for her own peace, and he were to come along and act like she was doing nothing important and demand her attention in that moment. Like the disconnects are huge, and most people don't even know that we're doing it. We don't know. Our instincts are so different. And so this thing of getting on your own team, right? Like this unified will within a couple, getting unified in making the partnership a priority. And it's like the teacher in the Queen's Code talks about, if your partnership is the priority, right? And in this case, she's encouraging Karen and Mike to make their sex life like an actual expression of love and desire and pleasure and generosity, that their sex life will take care of making a child. And I know there's reasons, biological reasons, why that's insufficient, but I think the unified will of a couple, which then calms everybody down, we can do this, is really important. And I'll confess, I have been a mother of 3 children. I have messed with women because the instinct is so strong, and it's your survival instinct. I want to have a baby. I want to have a baby. And I'll say, do you want to have a 13-year-old screaming at you that they didn't ask to be born and they hate you? They're like, what? Like, well, do you want to be a parent? Do you just want to have a baby, or do you want to be a parent?
Good question.
Yes. It's an important question to answer, because instinct tells us to have a baby. Instinct will even have us think that having a baby is going to make our marriage stronger, instead of stress it in every possible way. Right. So I shake people. You sure you want that promotion? You sure you want all that accountability? So
you help them dig deeper, kind of understand where they might need to work on, their perception of things now, and work on the relationships, which me and Mary do all the time with our patients. We say, take care of you now, kind of like as queen, as you talk about it, yes, so that you can, not just have a baby, but be healthy, getting pregnant, feeling good during your pregnancy, and then being a better parent after. And like you're saying, like, what do you want to be, a parent, or do you want to have a baby? Which are all important, super important questions, because some women fear being pregnant, or they fear labor. And so to uncover those things, even if there is some kind of, reason, like they have a, clinical condition that's preventing them from getting pregnant, these are important questions, because it might, just help them, feel lighter and change their perception on this journey. And it might be like some kind of, like, I recognize now there's big reasons why, like, if you had have sat down and asked me those questions back when we were trying to conceive, because I ended up doing IVF and we struggled a lot in our years, I think that you might have uncovered some interesting answers in those regards as to maybe why and or how it could have even impacted my ability to get pregnant. So I have a question, though, that I really want to know. I want you to explain to viewers, like, how do women view intimacy compared to men? Because as we know, the female brain's like greatly impacted by hormones. Men have different hormones, women have different hormones, and it really does impact like their, how they view things, and there's big misunderstandings about each other often. And one of them is like how we even view intimacy, and because you spoke to that just now, like if you can explain a little bit more.
Well, even just the word intimacy, do you mean sex, or do you mean emotional intimacy, spiritual intimacy, mental intimacy? What do you mean by it?
Good question. So probably, then let's talk sex. Let's talk sex for intimacy. Yeah, let's just jump right there, and then we'll scale back.
And then we'll scale back.
Yeah, I think it's all of it, but we'll start with the sex.
Or scale up depending on who you're talking to.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's when I started studying men in 1991, I believed that men were incapable of intimacy and that they didn't care about it at all. And that it was just like, don't look to a man to be seen, to be heard, to be understood, to be known, to connect in a deeply emotional way. I believe they were incapable of it. And then as I learned more and more about them, I was stunned. I was stunned to find out how much they crave intimacy and what an enormous capacity they have for intimacy. And so it had me, and still does, go looking for, okay, if they have a capacity and they have a desire, then how come it isn't happening? Why doesn't it happen naturally? And one of the biggest things that I found is, one way to think of it is you could think of you could think of it as a warrior. That as a warrior, which men are innately warriors, it would be an expression of the instinct to protect, which is second only to procreate. As a warrior, they have a certain relationship to information and to revealing themselves. And it basically comes down to, don't reveal anything that can be used against you. So don't reveal your plans because they could be foiled. Don't reveal your strengths unless you're overstating them to intimidate. Don't reveal your weaknesses because they'll be used against you. Don't reveal anything you need because that's a weakness and it'll be used against you. And don't reveal your attachments. Don't reveal what you most care about. Don't reveal that. It'll be used against you. And one of the things that happens is that when a man does reveal any of those things to her, it triggers an instinct that we have. You could call it status. It's consistent with pack and herd animals, that we survive and thrive by our status. And so a woman, when a man has revealed himself to her, she'll tell other people what he's revealed in order to demonstrate how important she is and raise the perception of her status. Not knowing that to a man, that is a profound betrayal. Profound. And it will cause him to not reveal himself again. And so I was trying to get to know them, but how do you feel? And how did you feel about that? And how were you affected by that? They won't answer. And we feel shut out. And then we stop trying to connect with what matters to us. And then it becomes very superficial. And we don't even know that we caused it. We think men are superficial instead of their deep, deep wells. And their feelings are at the bottom of the well. And this is why I've been teaching for so long what I call waiting for the well, right? That when you ask a man a question, only ask him questions you're committed to the answer. And you'll wait as long as it takes for them to commit to answering that question, for them to think about their answer to that question, and then to them, when they're ready, which could be days or weeks or months later, to deliver the answer to that question without being interrupted with, yeah, buts and what abouts, and that's stupid, and what do you think that for, right? To do what women say they want. Why can't men just listen? Well, as a woman, have you ever just listened? That's one of the hardest things for a woman to learn to do, just listen. And it's one of the first things I learned to do was just listen. And it's how I learned so much about men, because the men who I studied when I first started listening, I already had their trust. Had been their coach and what I called their committed listener for years at that time. So I already had their trust. They knew I didn't use any of it against them, which I didn't even know that I had earned it, right? And then so many of the men that I was studying men with were men sitting next to me on airplanes. I didn't know their name. I didn't know where they lived. I didn't know anything. I couldn't hurt them. And so they just spilled all the beans. And sometimes they would cry. I remember a man sobbing with me sitting next to him in an airport about what it was like when his sister died when he was a boy. And he's like, I can't believe I'm telling you this. I can't believe I'm telling you this. And I've heard that so many times from men. My wife doesn't know this about me. I can't believe you're telling you this. I'm like, well, I can't hurt you. And then there's men I've proven I wouldn't hurt them. And that's how we end up with intimacy. And it's the difference between sex and making love, intimacy. And I remember talking to women about don't date your type. They'll make you crazy because they activate all our instincts. And they were shocked that I had sex with my husband when he wasn't my type and before chemistry had built. Just like, you had sex without chemistry? And I'm like, it's called affection.
Wow. That's amazing, right? Because we're in this romanticized world and you watch movies and it's always about romantic love. And yet
Disney.
Yeah, Disney, right. And yet I've seen some of the most incredible relationships, even in what do you call them? Arranged marriages, where they learn, but they still had their own autonomy. The parents would set them up, but they still had their final say. And even though it may not start at love at first sight, it's like that deep understanding and connection and listening is what you're speaking about. That's beautiful. Thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. I was doing everything that normal women do, and I was talking to a man about how it was going. And he said something that changed the course of my life. He said, that's all circumstances, right? Because I was looking for compatibility and this and that and the other thing. And I'm like, okay, well, if I'm not looking for that, what do I look for? And he said, try resonance. And I looked it up in a dictionary but even before that, I already knew what he was talking about. Resonance. Who do I have resonance with? And I thought, oh, that Greg guy with the funny hair.
That's awesome.
We were married for 26 years before he passed. And, but resonance, it means to resound. So if you think about who are the people around whom you feel amplified, that you're even more the version of yourself that you most want to be. It's just naturally bigger around that person. And what I would say to Greg is, I married you because you have my favorite self. Or around you is when my favorite version of myself shows up. And it just did, because of how he was and how he related to me and how he listened to me and how he looked at me. And I was comparing pictures a couple weeks ago of when we were first together, the look in his eyes, and the last picture taken of him and the look in his eyes. Exactly the same. Almost 3 decades later. So,
wow.
But instinctually, that's not what we're going to look for. We're going to look for genetic inheritance for our children, like my son's father, Mr. Tall, Dark, and handsome genius who, oh my gosh, now I make him laugh because I'm so myself. But by the time we got divorced after 7 years, I'd only made him laugh twice because I was so not funny around him. Oh my gosh. But my son's genetic inheritance paid out. Chemistry's smart about the survival of the species. It just doesn't know squat about happiness and fulfillment and a good parenting partner and all that other stuff.
That's awesome. So what do you do though when you have a couple that are having challenges? So it's like, do you just all of a sudden say, okay, I give up because it seems like we're mismatched? Or can it be resolved? Can this be learned behavior? When you talk about the Queen's Code, like, can it be learned so that you can resolve the issues within the partnership that you have currently?
I'm of two minds about it. As long as there's communication, I think anything is possible. And when we can find out, like in the Queen's Code, women find out how we've been disrespecting and misinterpreting men. In our online course, Understanding Women, both men and women find out how we haven't understood women. We're constantly scaring the pucky out of them and communicating, I don't admire you, I don't respect you. And we don't even mean to. Men have tremendous admiration and respect for women. They just have opposite instincts in how they show it. And like, for example, when a woman's upset, most men do what they would want when they're upset. They leave her alone. Like they would like to be left alone. Very few women want to be left alone when they're upset. That means you don't care about me, right? And the very least, come ask me, do you want to be left alone? Or one of the reasons I'm with my boyfriend is because he unless I close the door, which I told him, if I close the door, I'm protecting you from me. Don't come in. Otherwise, come get me. And he does. He always comes and gets me. Like, you want to hug it out? You want to talk? He's very courageous. So yeah, I would call it reaching. If we're reaching towards each other, so much can happen that's amazing. Including, like with Greg, so not my type at all, no chemistry at all, just this magnetic attraction of just joy being around him. And then I started looking for what I later could connect the dots causes chemistry. That in women, what causes chemistry is the perception of strength. So I started looking for his strength. And the first place I found it was in his hands. I looked down at his hand. We were sitting next to each other at breakfast. I looked down at his hands and I was like, oh. He had these long, intelligent fingers, and then he had these thick, broad palms. And I mean, I was just amazed, right? And I had a visceral reaction.
Wow. So you mean physical strength,
That's one way, physical strength. And I've actually have taught smaller statured men to offer to arm wrestle a woman. Like on a date. Like,
that's funny.
It doesn't seem like I can take care of you. Would you like to arm wrestle? And I tell them, don't put her down. Just don't let her move your arm. And men are so much stronger than women. Even small men are so much stronger than us because of testosterone that they can just, I said, just hold it, hold it. And she's until she's doing everything. She's got two arms going. She's doing everything, trying to move your arm. Just hold it until it dawns on her and you'll see it in her eyes. Oh. But so it can be physical strength, which is why height has such an impact on us in a bad way. It often brings out the worst in us because we're too attracted. But it also can be integrity, which is one of the appeals of what we would call bad boys, because someone who's willing to defy authority, that's a kind of strength, right? Intelligence. I'm such a sucker for vocabulary as a wordy, right? Dan will use these words, and I call it a jump start as we talk about the Queen's Code. He'll say something, I'm like, what? You just used what? And he's such a funny contrast. You know, my first impression of him, I called him Mr. Rough and Ready. And then these words come out of his mouth in between the two of them. It's a good thing I'm really clear about boundaries. And before I ever met him in person and had all those reactions, we'd already worked out a whole bunch of deal breakers before we decided, okay, let's find out who we can be for each other now that we know these things are aligned. Now we'll meet in person, which I recommend people do. You add the physical component and you can get really stupid really fast, either with chemistry or with dismissing someone because you don't have chemistry.
Right.
We can cause chemistry. We seriously can cause it. We just have to go looking for strength. And it shows up in so many forms. It can be loyalty. It can be support.